So welcome to yet another episode of the People, Passion and Purpose podcast. So this one is again brought to you by me, that's Pungidasa, and I am a coach. And with me also is another coach, and a person who I've known only for the last 8-ish months. Very surprising that we've known each other only 9 to 8 months, but it feels like I've known Vivek forever. And so I thought, okay, since I know him well enough, I can also bring him to the podcast and have him share his story of all his adventures in the US, being somebody who's worked in very interesting offices, Instagram, LinkedIn, Amazon, if I know, not Amazon, Google, and now with Work Genie and working with all of us, I think. So if you need anything, always ask Vivek. Vivek is the in-house AI, what is that? AI expert. So without further ado, I think I'll pass on the baton to Vivek to introduce himself, share things that he knows is interesting about himself that I don't know and you don't know. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Pungi, for having me. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity. Hi there to everyone listening to this. I can start with a brief blurb. So my name is Vivek. I was born in then Bombay, now Mumbai. I spent the first 10 years of my life in Tanzania in East Africa. And my dad was working at the time. Most of my formative years were in Bombay, where I did my middle school, high school. I did my bachelor's in computer engineering. And then I went to the US in 2001 to do graduate school in computer science. And I've lived there ever since. So I trained as a computer scientist, worked as a software engineer for 2 years. And then I spent 15 years doing product management at a variety of places in a variety of roles. I think as a person, I gravitate towards breadth over depth. So I had the opportunity to work on a number of different products, solving a number of different problems. At Microsoft, I worked on enterprise software. I was on the product team for Microsoft Office. After that, I went to Google for 5 years, where I worked on search ads. Following Google, I went to LinkedIn, where I worked on the news feed and the homepage. My first foray into social networking. I then worked at the small startup that LinkedIn acquired. After this, I went to Instagram to work on the growth team. That was a fascinating experience. And my last real job was at Amazon, where I worked on this product called Amazon Key. Fast forward to December 2019, I took what I was expecting would be a small break, which ended up being a really long break. So I took around 2 years off. And in the Feb of last year, I started my latest venture that I'm calling Work Genie. And within the process of starting Work Genie, that I learned about the ICF, decided to get trained as a coach myself. Did a 20-week coaching foundations program, followed up with an advanced coaching program. And that is where I met Pungi, where we had the good fortune of being in the same batch, and I've learned a lot from him. I think I would start with acknowledging that I've had a couple of peer coaching sessions with Pungi where he coached me, and they were very, very valuable, and I think meaningful in giving direction to my journey and path. So thank you for that. And lastly, I just wanted to say, outside of all this, I think, in fact, perhaps most important, my wife, Kiki, and I, we've been married for 17 years, and we have a 10-year-old and a 7-year-old, Kabir and Krish. And so we live in Mountain View, California. I've spent more time now in Mountain View than any other city. But at the moment, I am visiting India, and I am in Mumbai. With that, over to you, Pungi, to take this in whatever direction you choose to.
Wow. So with so much of things. So all that we see now with Google, Amazon, LinkedIn, Instagram. You've been there, Microsoft. You've been there where it has been very interesting. And now with Work Genie and also with these things, and also I know a lot of your other interests, Vedanta, Vipassana, and coaching. So a lot of very interesting conversations to have with you today. And yeah, I think your T-shirt says you're the awesome dad of Vishal Kabir. Um, yeah, I don't know where to start with Vivek. So what I know is Vivek is always awake. And you said you don't really get into the depth of certain things. You love the breadth. So what are these are things that I know about you, Vipassana and other things. Anything else that you are passionate about that we don't know yet?
I think this is a good question. So I'll answer a slightly different question, which gets at what you're saying, which is what is occupying me right now. I think my coaching journey kickstarted my spiritual journey. And in the July of this year, I had this opportunity to attend a week-long retreat at this place called the Vedanta Academy, which has got me very interested in that space. And I've been spending a little bit of time in that space, talking to people, listening to discourses and commentaries. And if I think about what I'm up to now or the way I make sense of my world, I think about it as the three endeavors of strengthening the intellect through the study of Vedanta, purifying the mind through the study of this body of work called NVC, or nonviolent communication, which also I've taken a deep interest in. And I think the third area where I need to do some work, I have an aspiration to, but haven't made strides, is essentially take care of the body through, in Western science, I would think of it as nutrition and movement of exercise. I want to take a look at the Eastern traditions of Ayurveda and yoga as the vehicle to do those things. So Vedanta to strengthen the intellect, NVC as the way to think about the mind, and just how I can make a contribution to the world as I learn about these things is the way I'm thinking about it. That's where I'm spending most of my time.
So all these also gives you time to be a part of many WhatsApp groups, share conversations. So you lab is something that I think you also missed out. So there's so many other things that Vivek is involved in. So I think I know Vivek from all of these conversations. So I think maybe my job right now is to sort of put a light onto something that I already know and something that I don't know of, and share it with the audience, and especially all those who are listening and viewing. So I have found a very strong space of giving. So Vivek is very fond of giving things that he knows and enabling connections and all that. So how did that come through? What's the philosophy behind that?
I actually think if you look deep down, all of us humans are this way, in that we have this innate need within us to contribute to the journeys of the people we know and we care about. Like, think about, say, for example, when humans come into this world, right? When we are born, the mother embodies that selfless giving in terms of the baby means everything to her, and even at great personal sacrifice, she wants to take care of the baby, nourish the baby, and make for a great experience for the baby, right? And similarly, if you think about as that baby grows up, it has similar feelings towards, say, initially maybe its family, maybe even close friends. And you will actually see this in, so it's very interesting. The study of Vedanta, one of the things that really stuck with me in a recent thing that I watched was all of it comes from this identification. And the example they used was, if you have, say, a wart in your hand, to you, it is still your hand. So you might look at that wound and you might nourish it. You might even put something on it, take care of it. You do not find it abhorrent in the least. But at the same time, if you show this to a friend and say, hey, look at this wart in my hand, they'll be like, ew, dude, TMI, keep it to yourself. And the lesson inherent in there is that your fondness for that thing comes to the process of identification because you see it as your body. And now a similar thing is, say, for example, suppose somebody else did something which you find abhorrent or in dissonance with your values. You might find a need to admonish them or show them the right path, or maybe even excommunicate them or not deal with them. But now, if you ask the same question, how would I behave if my son or somebody I closely cherish behave the same way? You might try to help them see the light. You might try to bring them around and you might try to take them forward. And again, it comes through the process of identification because it's like me, my body, my son, my country, and all of these are concentric circles. And the question posed is, what if you extended one way to dissolve that mindness is to actually extend that mindness to everything and everything there is. And that is what I have come to understand as this detached attachment. You are detached, but not in the sense of, oh, I don't care what happens to this person or this thing. You are detached in that you are attached to everything and everyone there is. So there is no preferential attachment. Now, I by no means claim to be anywhere close to or anything near that, but your question of that just provoked that for me, because I think this is how people inherently are, which is they're very, very happy to give if you provide those conditions of psychological safety where that is all of our true nature.
So you're not doing anything special. It's just that all conditions for you are met. So you are enabling sharing.
I think so. Here's the thing, right? The other thing, in fact, this other thing comes to mind for me. I remember Ujjwalji. When I had spoken to him in the June of last year, right? Before I was going to start his foundations program. So he was telling me about his experience and his background. And one thing he said stuck with me. I've repeated this to many people. He was like, look, in the last decade or so that I've been doing this, I have had coaching conversations with, say, order of 1,000 people. Now, I don't know and I can't tell whether I have benefited them because that is for them to know. But what I can say for a fact is that I, i.e. Ujjwalji, has benefited from each and every one of these conversations. And I think that is the part I'm trying to come at, which is with a lot of this, when people say, oh my God, this person is so generous, the reason they give so liberally is not because they think of it as a sacrifice in terms of I have to take this out and give, but they are getting in the process. And the universe is such that the law of cause and effect and the law of karma holds, and that as you give generously, that flows right back. It reminds me of that, whatever the old saying, ki, मुझे 8 आने दो भगवान तुम्हें 8 करोड़ देगा, the railroad beggar who would tell you. That is actually in some sense true.
So by giving you get. Interesting, because I think I also agree with that philosophy. By giving you get a lot more than you are given. So that's something also from my own volunteer experiences and all that it comes forth. So I'm very curious about your Tanzania journey and experiences. How is it? Because for me and for my viewers generally, Africa is like a lot of us don't even know that Africa is a continent, not a country. So,
Dude, I think you're exaggerating slightly in terms of when you say most people don't know Africa is a continent. I don't know if I agree with that.
No, it's not a continent. I think the schools textbooks will say that Africa is a continent, but a lot of us say that Africa is a country. Like all of the Africa is a country. So they don't know that there are multiple smaller countries or like bigger countries collectively forming the continent of Africa. So how is it in growing up in Tanzania? What any experiences that from there would you like to share?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about that. First, I'll caveat all this with I actually only lived full-time in Africa between, say, 0.5 and 10.5. And then I would go back to spend 2 or 3 months of summer vacation over there between 10 and 15. So caveat, it was a long time ago. And I think the last time I was in Tanzania was probably in 1995, which was a full 28 years ago. With those caveats out of the way, I'll go and answer your question. So it was in Tanzania, I had an opportunity to live not just in the capital, Dar es Salaam, but also some of these smaller cities or villages in the interior, notably this place called Iringa and this place called Songia. And the thing which stood out for me was I think Tanzania at that time was very lucky because Africa, while the people share a lot of things in common, there's actually a lot of differences as well in their experience. Because many of those countries over that time and since after have gone through, say, for example, brutal dictators, civil war, exploitation from the West, etc., and those things. But Tanzania was a little bit of an oasis in that at least around the time we were there was none of that. While Uganda to the north and Zambia and Zimbabwe and all were having many of these experiences with Mugabe and all of these things, Tanzania was very, very peaceful. So that was one amazing thing. And what stood out for me in terms of the Tanzanian people is that just sense of ease. Like the whole thing which shows up in Lion King and all those things, that attitude of Hakuna Matata. It will all just take care of itself. Pole pole. Pole pole means slowly. Now this, if you take somebody who's like from some Taipei, let's say the heart of Silicon Valley of Bangalore, an investment banker, and throw them into the mix, it can actually be a little jarring because it's like nothing appears to get done. Like if people complain about IST, wait till they are introduced to, at that time, Tanzania Standard Time, which is people just roam in when they can, and it is just assumed to be a way of the world. I'll give you a couple of examples. So suppose you're somewhere and you're a little lost and you're asking somebody, how do I get to this specific destination? Say to the post office. Their instructions will typically be, go that way and then just take a right. And then you're like, okay, what comes next? They're like, you deal with that after you go that way, get to the end and then take a right. Everybody's going to be there. So I don't want to burden you with the next 10 steps. Just take the next one step and figure it out as you go. Another thing which I remember is the Tanzanian language. So it is very, very metaphorical. For example, the word pira, it stands for rubber. Pira also stands for ball. Pira also stands for tires, which is all of these are represented by the exact same word. Similarly, say the word dege. The word dege means aeroplane, but the word dege also means bird. The word nyama means meat that you eat, but the word nyama also means wildlife that you see. And there's numerous such examples. So those are a couple of things which come to mind. The people are very, very kind, very, very easygoing, chill, and laid back.
Wow. I could draw that image in terms of the aeroplane and the bird, the rubber and this thing. They all stem from the root words themselves. So they're very similar. Or they're extended interpretations of the root word. Yeah, it reminds me of some places beyond Bangalore. And people are very chill. Specifically, whatever comes to my mind is people near the coastal areas are very chill people. There's a different pace at which life moves. It's not as hustle and bustle as the cities. Lovely, but yeah, also in terms of Tanzania, anything that you say is an adventure for you, because all that you now explained was like all chill.
Oh yeah, 100%. So for example, the Tanzania had pristine nature and wildlife. So at that time, Tanzania and Kenya are two neighboring countries. And it used to be the case then. I'm not actually very familiar with how it is now. But Kenya was a little bit ahead in terms of development. So Western influence, hotels, tourist operators, etc., etc. So when it came to say safaris and excursions and things like that, a lot of the tourists would go into Kenya because, for example, direct flights to Nairobi and things like that. But most of the tourists with more of an eye who knew it would come to Tanzania to act, because the best wildlife reserves like the Serengeti, Arusha, Gorongoro, all of them were in Tanzania. So it's almost like the 5-minute tourist who wanted to make a quick 1-week trip and touch 5 sites might not even come to Tanzania, whereas the discerning tourists who plan to spend 6 weeks over there would spend the bulk and sometimes the entirety of their time in Tanzania, because that is where the real sites were. Very similarly, again, back at the time, I don't know what the situation is now, a similar situation between Zimbabwe and Zambia. So the Victoria Falls, which is quite literally at the border of Zambia and Zimbabwe, and this was a trip we had made when I was back there living in Tanzania. Zimbabwe had all the hotels and the accommodation and the arrangement, but the very best of the falls was to be found in Zambia. So people would often stay in Zimbabwe because that's where the hotels were, but set out early in the morning and go on the sunset cruise on the Zambezi, looking at these falls, walk up to the falls, Knife Edge Bridge, etc., which were in Zambia. So Tanzania, and in terms of what Tanzania had to offer that I very clearly remember, I think it was the wildlife, the opportunity to, especially Gorongoro, right? It is a it's a natural crater. And because it's a small crater, I don't remember the exact square footage, but it's very small. And within the crater, you find all the big five. You find cheetahs and leopards and rhinos and elephants and wildebeests and zebras and hyenas and flamingos and on and on and on. And so you are virtually guaranteed sightings of all of these things in that 1-day trip over there. It is both a natural ecosystem, i.e., it is not a zoo, but also it is zoo-like in that because it is a crater, all of these animals live in that large crater and don't all run away outside, as an example. Yeah, waterfalls, wildlife, beautiful place.
Mm-hmm. So you met all the big five.
I did see them.
And then you also worked with all the big four. Oh, yes. So from Mumbai to Tanzania, that's how it happened? Or you were born in Mumbai, went to Tanzania?
So my dad was working there at the time, but since Tanzania was relatively green at that time, my mom came to Bombay to give birth to me, and also my sister, who was born a year and a quarter before me. And I must have spent, I don't know, 3-6 something months here before mom and me went back to join dad in Tanzania. If I remember correctly, my dad was in Tanzania when I was born because he was working, and mom was in Mumbai with my grandmom.
So growing up, how many languages did you learn?
So let's see, the languages which I, both then and now, so English, I would say, is in all sense of the word, my first language, in that I think in English, etc. Hindi, interestingly, when I was in Tanzania and I went to school there until the 4th standard, I was learning Hindi at a reasonably advanced level because we were studying under the CBSE board. And then I came back to Maharashtra and then it was the state board. So English, Hindi. Tamil is my mother tongue, which I can speak in Tamil, but then just like spoken Tamil. I know the script a little bit because my grandmom actually taught me a little bit in Tanzania, but it was like maybe a few hours of instruction, so I can recognize that. I can't really claim to be able to read it. So English, Hindi, Tamil, Marathi, I know a little bit, mainly because I lived in Mumbai and 5th, 6th, 7th, it was required learning Marathi in school. I remember, in fact, 5th standard when I came, I was learning Marathi for the first time. I got 83 in that final. 6th standard, I got 73. 7th standard, I got 63. And luckily, before this arithmetic progression was going to hit 0, I was able to take Sanskrit in the 8th standard. So, and then Swahili, of course, in Tanzania, not written but spoken. I can still, like, 1 to 10, count to 10, all those words I shared with you. I know a little bit of Swahili. I think that is mostly the languages I know. I can maybe lay a partial claim to understand a little bit of Guju. A lot of my friends in Bombay speak Guju. My wife is Gujarati, but then I can't really speak, and my Gujarati is limited to Suche, Saruche, Dandalike, Maruche, which in itself is not accurate Guju. So
So even I don't know what you said, but I think Dandaleke is something that I was like, okay, you're gonna hit me with something.
right, it's roughly the equivalent of what's up, should I get a stick and beat you? At least it's my interpretation.
Oh, lovely.
Oh no, Suche is how I think, Saruche is things are good, and then it's Dandaleke, Maruche.
Lovely. So really interesting to hear of all the adventures you've had in your early upbringing. And yeah, what prompted you to study further and go to the States?
Good questions. So let's see. After, I think the way it used to work in India at that time, in fact, somebody said this. In fact, Gautam was saying this in a lecture. Like the sorting mechanism is okay. If you got 90%, you do science. If you do 90 to 70%, you do commerce. If you do below 70%, you do arts. As though there's some artificial sorting mechanism, even though there might be people with 95 plus who might make great artists that should probably go there. I think I did have an aptitude for math and physics and things like that. So it was something I enjoyed, which probably drew me towards science as I think that was probably a reasonable choice at that time. And also engineering, I think even dealing with abstract concepts. So, but to come to your question of what led me to go there to the US, I think there's definitely an aspect of, dude, this is the formula. You come here, finish your engineering, give the GRE. If you do well, apply to a few universities. There's an aspect of that. And then I was like, hey, this is a good opportunity to just go check it out. At that time, at least my recollection of my belief, which itself might be reconstructed, is that I was like, let's go give it a shot. Nothing to lose. We can go there, go to school for a couple of years over there and see what it is like. And at that time, it was in many of these schools, for example, you would get a full scholarship where they would pay for all the tuition. And they would give you, if I remember correctly, UIUC was paying me like a $1,200 or a $1,500 stipend. And so just check it out and see what it's like. I think that's how it started. And then when I went there, the thing I liked over there is it resonated a lot with many of my values. And I was able to get a little bit of this best of both worlds because UIUC, where I went for grad school, right? People used to fondly call it the University of Indians and the University of Chinese. Because let's say, for example, in my master's class of whatever, maybe 100 or so people, the vast majority of the people were of Asian and East Asian origin. So it's not like you missed in India in any sense at all. And then all the places in the US where I have lived, I stayed in Seattle for 5 years and I lived in Mountain View since 2008. There is a huge population of expatriate Indians. And it's also very, very cosmopolitan, where you have people from all over India. So, yeah, I like the arrangement, so to speak.
And you continue to find that cosmopolitan space and that Indian is still with Mountain View, so you continue there.
Yeah, I think there's two things. So, A, there's cosmopolitanness and say the Indianness, and also where we live in the San Francisco Bay Area and Mountain View, there's a lot of cosmopolitanness and worldness. Like, let's say, for example, Krish, my now 7-year-old, in his last school at Springer, when he was in second grade, in his class across the two divisions, there were other kids whose parents were from Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, Pakistan, India, Israel, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Turkey, South America, Canada. It was like almost like a mini United Nations, which is it was so so I really liked that, which is I value kind of diversity in terms of the opportunity to learn from people with a breadth of perspectives, a breadth of experiences different than my own. And that is what I really, really like about the San Francisco Bay Area in particular.
Mm-hmm. So you worked there extensively in terms of some amazing names, big names. And I also know that you've taught product management. So how did teaching come? Or, what's your passion around teaching?
So I think the very first time, this was right after my LinkedIn job, before I started my next thing, there was a time when I was thinking about, hey, what should I do? And I think so teaching is something which I naturally enjoy. Like even while I was right from school, in fact, where I'm sitting right now, I remember while I was in engineering, often other students would come to me with the, hey, help me solve this, help me understand this, help me reason about it. And it is something I inherently enjoyed. And I noticed that it was my, and this is true for most people, but teaching for me is the mechanism for learning. I think I became a much better product manager because I spent time teaching product management, and even my style of teaching. In fact, thinking back to my earliest times at, say, General Assembly, was where if there was a class of, say, 15 to 20, I would post to them a challenge and ask them to think of the way these coaching webinars work today, right? Which is, hey, here's a prompt. Get the class to respond to their prompt and essentially construct the lesson in class. And after you've exhausted the entirety of the class's knowledge, you realize that in their collective knowledge, you have completed 80% of the lesson. And then you bring in this framework and say, here's the other 20%, and here's the good mnemonic by which to remember it. So the thing I like about this teaching approach is, A, they remember it because they're not going back with memories of what you told them. They're going back with memories of what they co-created. And often when they do the co-creation, it will often sometimes teach you things which weren't in your initial set. So the next time you're delivering that same lesson, you go back not just with what you knew, but what with your students taught you in the process. Or let's say, for example, going through an entire product lifecycle. If you're a practicing product manager, you go through the discovery process, prototyping process, design and development, put it out there, sales support, marketing, growth, and how the product continues. For one instance, with yourself. If you're running a product management cohort with 20 people, each of these 20 is going through some mini version of that in the course, and you have an opportunity to witness them do it, learn from their experiences, teach them from each other's experiences and your experiences, and you build this wealth of stories in your head about what works in what context, in which way. So it's very, very enriching. It's in fact mapping this back to coaching, right? What I have found is if there's a particular quest I want to take, the easiest way to essentially, you could go and hire McKinsey consultants to help you on that quest, or you could go find people who are on that same quest and coach them. And because of the nature of coaching, when you go into a coaching conversation with them, you need to know nothing about the subject. And you emerge from that conversation knowing a lot about the subject, which you can directly apply in your own situation.
Yeah. I think when you were sharing this, I think I also was reminded of this space as to how Vivek carries so many memories and so many saying, you go get McKinsey. This is what Ramana Maharshi said. This is what, Ma Slinger said. So apart from product management, there's also like a huge memory associated with Vivek. So
I remember stories. I think I tend to, and I think this is actually, again, something which is not just me, it's true of most people. Like all of us remember these stories of something which happened in childhood or to somebody else. Right? I think most of my memory of how to do things or what to do or what might work or might not work is actually embedded in stories. And they're very relatable. Like even if I think of some of the best nonfiction books I've read, right? One which comes to mind is this book called The Five Dysfunctions of Team, a Leadership Parable. Where, in fact, this is not something new, right? The ancient dudes knew that. That's why the Mahabharata is essentially a story. It is meant to teach you how to live life, how to deal with society and everything else. in the form of a story.
Absolutely, absolutely. We all remember stories. So what are stories that you remember from your childhood, remember from your life that it keeps coming back to you?
I think I look at it a little differently. So it's, you ask a good question, because for me, this is very surprising, apparent contradiction, which is I tend not to remember the details. I tend to remember the abstractions. Which is, suppose I have a detailed conversation with somebody, their memory of what happened, and some people have an eye for detail and they will remember all these things about exactly what happened. I will automatically, even during the conversation, abstract it into some kind of mental model, which will serve me, could serve others in the future. For example, this little detail of when Ujwalji was sharing this thing about, hey, when I coached all these guys, I got from that conversation as much I had to give. That kind of anecdote just sticks with me. And there's many, many such anecdotes that I remember. But they tend to be anecdotes with some kind of moral or lesson that I want to preserve. I think I have a somewhat fainter memory for details. To give you an example, if I go to a new place, I will often rely on the GPS to take me from place A to B. And I will just not even make any attempt to try to remember the path. Just because the GPS is there, I don't feel called to remember it. I just hit and go. Whereas my wife is the exact opposite. She will inherently try to push herself to not use nav and only fall back on it when she needs it.
That's interesting. So what would you do if your phones, like all phones in the world suddenly are off? And
I think I would adapt. And this is again another thing about humans in general. And I think I know this about me, which is if I was thrown into that, then I could readily adapt. Think about phone numbers, right? There was the time when all of us, me included, used to remember phone numbers for our friends. I even remember my own phone number, whatever, 25255837 or whatever, things like that. I used to remember them because they served a purpose. And then it became unnecessary. There's still people I know who remember phone numbers because for them it wasn't a means to an end alone. It was also a sport in itself. For me, it was a monotony which I had to do as a means to an end. And the moment somebody said, you don't have to do it anymore, I was like, great. Or let's say, for example, birthdays. Let's say in history, when you say good memory, right? There are some these stories which I remember from long, long ago, or say these Swahili words. But I tend not to remember things like birthdays. In fact, outside of say my immediate family, maybe dad, mom, sister, kids, and wife, I I actually don't remember birthdays. I rely on a calendar or something like that to remind me about them.
yeah, so I rely on friends. I rely on people sharing birthdays on their WhatsApp statuses, Insta stories, and suddenly, okay, happy birthday.
Right.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think the detailing part and phone numbers are very, very relevant example. So, uh, absolutely, absolutely amazing stories and amazing references. So, yeah, I think going on into say the next part. So, how did coaching come to you?
So, coaching. So, when I was doing product management, right? Product management actually has a lot of similarity with coaching, and I'll tell you how. So, as a product manager, you're not actually doing user research or design or development or testing or sales or marketing or support or data analytics or any of that full time. What you are doing is working with people who are really good at each of those things and orchestrate shipping the right product to the right customer at the right time. I quite literally, it's about helping people discover their gifts, develop them, and deploy them towards some larger goal. So it has a lot in common. And when I started WorkGenie, I actually not know about the ICF. People would often come to me in terms of, hey, should I do product? How do I become a product manager? Or how do I get better as a product manager? When I was teaching product management or other situations, right? That was something I naturally enjoyed. So I started Work Genie as this. Essentially, we used to joke. I used to tell my cousin that we should call this service gas. There's Gyan as a service. People just come to you with some problem and you just wax eloquent and they're like, "Ooh, this is so cool," and go away. Now, coaching is not that, okay? Which I have subsequently learned. But then this is how that initially started. And then it was actually amongst my friends. I was like, "Hey, I'm going to experiment with this. Are you interested?" A few of them were, so we were going about it. Then, luckily for me, two conversations come to mind. One was with this guy, Steve Cadigan, who used to be the chief people officer at LinkedIn when I was there. And another was with this guy, Mike Welch, who used to head up learning and development for product and design and engineering at Facebook when I was at Instagram. Focus block kicked in.
So we were on the Facebook and Insta, and then suddenly you were off Zoom.
Right. No, what happened was my focus blocker kicked in. So I've started using this in the last 2 weeks or so, and I'm actually really liking it. So what happens is you just set this time, and at that time, it just ends whatever things are going on. And then in the version I have set, you need to go and request more time. In the more extreme version, there is no way to request more time, which I don't have any plans to do right now. So jumping back into my quick thing. So I was telling you how product management is like coaching. Then I was telling you about this Gyan as a service thing, etc. Then I was telling you about the conversation with Steve Cadigan and Mike Welch, right? So those are the guys who actually introduced me to other entrepreneurs in this space. And that is how I learned about the ICF, about coaching as practice right now. And very quickly in 4 or so weeks and conversations with those people, I realized that it would be an excellent idea to get trained as a coach myself, both for just my personal journey and Work Genie's journey. And that is how I started my coaching journey.
And how is it now that your coaching journey has started?
It is amazing. I think it's one of those things where, like they say, come for the X, stay for the Y. I think when I initially started, when I was trying to decide where to go, right, what a lot of people told me was that, in fact, I remember at least a couple of people told me this. They were like, "Look, even if you had no aspirations of coaching others, even if you were not doing Work Genie, etc., I would still recommend this because it will help you heighten your own awareness, heighten awareness in others, and help you be a better, say, father, husband, or whatever it is that you want to do." And this I heard not just from people who were offering coaching training, but also from people who had completed coaching training, many of whom were not practicing coaches and did not even have aspirations to, but they still found that the set of skills that they'd acquired through their coaching training process held them in really good stead throughout. So, and I think I have come to appreciate that. I think the part I'm most thankful for is this natural. I actually feel coaching is just another tributary into this spiritual journey, which is coaching at its essence is about evoking awareness, first in yourself and then in others, around this assessment of where they are, this aspiration of where they want to be, and helping to mold this approach to get to from the here to there. And if you think about the spiritual journey, all of it is about, really, in essence, if I had to put in 3 words, it's about dissolving the ignorance, because you come to realize that all agitations in all forms in any context actually comes from your own ignorance. And if the only thing you focused on was just to chip away at that ignorance and use whatever experience you encounter with anyone, anywhere, is just a, hey, what is this trying to teach me about my own ignorance, and focus on that. This is something I could go on for a bit about, but yeah, this whole subject object experience metaphor.
So when you were sharing this, I also was, when you're chiseling and, there's something already inside. So I was reminded of the video that you had sent me about the Michelangelo mindset. So another space, for whoever listeners are, Vivek is a connoisseur of all very interesting coaching videos, a lot of structure. So essentially, ask a Bard or AI to give him some very interesting recommendations, and he shares it with us. So I am curious, do you actually also go through all of those videos that you send us?
This is an excellent question that you bring up, and now I'm also going to make an admission. I've shared this with many people, so it's not a complete. So often, I do this with both books and videos, which is when I'm going through, let's say, an hour-long video. Okay, and I have this thing even with people, like even in an interview, right? In the first 5 minutes, I will know whether this person's strengths, interests, and aspirations are a good fit for this role and what it has to offer. The rest of it is more decorum, trying to, what do you say, add more certainty and information, etc. But a similar thing is with videos. In my first 5 minutes of any hour-long video, I will know whether this video is something which is immensely worthwhile or not. And I will often, including that particular video which you're talking about, I know about this Goulston guy. I'd read his Just Listen book, and it's an amazing book. But in that video, he talks about this Michelangelo mindset in the first part of it, maybe even the first 15-20%. At that point, I thought it was amazing, and I will often share at that point without having heard the rest of it. And in that particular case, I actually went back and edited my message because I was like, dude, this Michelangelo mindset is amazing, but this video is really about listening and how to be a better listener. So yeah, 100%. I do this, and there's actually books. In fact, this book comes to mind, this book called Outlive by this guy, Dr. Peter Attia. I heard this podcast between Tim Ferriss and Peter Attia, and I was like, sold, I have to get the book. So I bought the book. I have read less than 5% of that book. But in that 5%, I have been convinced that it's an amazing book for people who want to go deep down that rat hole. And I've gotten no fewer than 5 people to purchase the book. And those 5 have actually gone on to read the book in its entirety. So I think one thing I'll take away from this is I think I'm more of a, this comes back to that breath versus death. I think I'm naturally more of a catalyst or a flame starter than a seep thrower.
So if at all you have to impress Vivek with something, I think make sure the starters is very good. So the starters is recommend the film.
And this is true of all humans. I'm a very, very average human in that I'm median in all of these human characteristics.
I think also like you'll have to wait for the chutney or the sambar to actually say, okay, this is a good hotel, and only then recommend. So that's what I do. So so how are your food preferences? What works for you, what doesn't? Because I see you with the panche and the shirt, so you're a true integration of the West and the East, like the Kriya philosophy.
Wait. What do you see me with the what and the shirt with
the mundu or the panche?
What is panche?
The garment that you're
currently
wearing. Veshti.
How can you tell my veshti from this video? I don't see the veshti in the video. Oh, when I was sitting, there were brief periods. So first, amazing observation. See, they're the kind of observation skills that I don't possess and I admire. So I don't frequent the panchai as much as the veshti it is. As much as I should. I only started wearing it here because it's very, very hot in Mumbai and it's very comfortable. But I think I agree with that. I actually feel that I have been very, very fortunate to have had an experience in both these, say, growing up in India and now living in Mountain View. And there's so much to learn from really everybody. But in my experience, both these places, and I treasure that. And I treasure that about Kocharia as well. One of the reasons I decided to do my training there was because it brings these things together.
Absolutely. So
food preferences coming to, I'm utilitarian, I feel, when it comes to food. Like, I'll give you an example. When I'm hungry, the immediacy of satisfying my hunger is more important than So I'll give you a concrete example and take what you will from here, which is, if I'm hungry and there's food, the thing I try to optimize for is time to first morsel. I know many people who will actually embrace and suppress that hunger until the right food becomes available. Not me. If I'm hungry and there's like a packet of Parle G over here, that Parle G will be in my belly so that I no longer feel hungry. I know people who are planning for a lunch which is an hour and 15 minutes ahead and will hold their hunger until that lunch because they want to eat the proper food in the proper way at the proper time, which I admire, but I don't practice.
So whatever is serving your needs immediately. So you're like how many apples can you eat in an empty stomach? It's always one, because as soon as you've eaten one, you're not empty anymore.
Oh, interesting. This is like all I had to carry was the sixth idli. If I'd eaten the sixth idli first, I could have satisfied my hunger with one idli rather than six.
No, how I wish that was true. So no, I am a full-time foodie, so I don't know if I really get to a space where I'm going to, say, okay, whatever is there first, but I think I'm best of both worlds. I will eat whatever is essentially available within arm's reach, and also wait for that good meal that we're waiting for. So
I'm happy to do that. It's not like I will reject the amazing meal. Like if you say, hey, Vivek, I will cook you a storm, I will happily come and eat your storm also. But what I'm saying is, I cannot stay hungry in anticipation of that storm. I need to eat a little bit so that I am. You could just call it lack of self control when it comes to hunger.
oh wow, amazing. So we've almost chatted 1 hour, Vivek. So I think chatting with you has never been a space around time. I think it's always been about what value we get out of this space. So I'm curious now, what do you want the viewer or the listener to take out of all the conversation that we've had? And do you feel that there's been one space where I haven't touched? So I think 2 questions. I will not get markers, but yeah.
So let's see. So I think we touched on a potpourri of topics, a whole bunch of things. So actually, this is a good time to introduce that thing I was going to tell you, which is this triad I have come to see in everything. Okay. So now I'll touch on this triad very briefly, which is when a subject encounters an object, there is an experience.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this experience, what we don't acknowledge as much as we should, is as much a function of the subject as the object, which is to say, for the perfect object, like say Amrit, irrespective of the subject, the experience will be bliss. This we all recognize. But what we don't pay attention to as much is for the perfect subject, whatever that is for you. Suppose it's a guru or Lord Krishna or some other thing. Every object can induce that pleasant experience. And so the takeaway over here is we frequently go about life thinking about, in order to make my experience better, I have to change this thing and this person and this thing, without realizing that if you spent your entire attention on the subject, you could change your response to everything without needing anything around you to change.
Wow. Very interesting, very deep. So we need another podcast to get through. Oh wow. So any closing thoughts, Vivek?
This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for the opportunity and making the time. Yeah, it was really fun.
Yeah. So, and you have any questions around coaching and what resources to get to where? Just ask Vivek a question, and Vivek will get back to you an answer from Vivek's book. And yeah, I think amazing conversations with you, Vivek, always. So formalizing it in a podcast and putting it there on this thing, and maybe 5-10 years down the line, when we're very famous as coaches, people will be like, oh, have you heard the Vivek Pungi dialogue?
Oh my God.
Absolutely. So I'll officially close the recording. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Grateful.